One of the things we've all met is the accusation that we are strident or arrogant or vitriolic or shrill. What do we think about that?
Yeah, well, I'm amused by it because I went out of my way in my book to address reasonable religious people, and I flew the draft with groups of students who were deeply religious. And indeed, the first draft incurred some real anguish. And so I made adjustments. And it didn't do any good in the end because I still got hammered for being rude and aggressive. And I came to realize that it's a no-win situation. It's a mug's game. The religions have contrived to make it impossible to disagree with them critically without being rude.
Without being rude.
They sort of play the hurt feelings card at every opportunity, and you're faced with the choice of, well, am I going to be rude, or am I going to articulate this criticism? I mean, am I going to articulate it, or am I just going to button my lip?
Right. Well, that's what it is to trespass a taboo. I think we're all encountering the fact that religion is held off the table of rational criticism in some kind of formal way, even by, we're discovering, our fellow secularists and our fellow atheists. Just leave people to their own superstition, even if it's abject and causing harm. Don't look too closely at it.
No começo do século XXI, o ateísmo tem se popularizado no mundo acadêmico e na cultura. Isto se deve, sobretudo, ao trabalho de alguns intelectuais públicos que tomaram frente na sua promoção. Eles ficaram conhecidos como os quatro cavaleiros do novo ateísmo, fazendo uma referência, é claro, aos quatro cavaleiros do Apocalipse. Ou apenas como os novos ateus, The New Atheists. Neste vídeo eu vou apresentá-los, comentar os seus principais trabalhos e indicar onde você pode adquiri-los. Vamos começar com Richard Dawkins, talvez o homem mais famoso do mundo pelo ateísmo. Mas antes de se tornar uma figura proeminente no debate sobre fé e razão, ele já era reconhecido como um biólogo evolucionista de renome mundial. Nascido em 1941 na cidade de Nairobi, no Quênia, Dawkins cresceu com uma paixão pela biologia e pela ciência. Ele se destacou como um estudioso da teoria da evolução, culminando em sua obra seminal, O Gene Egoísta, publicada em 1976. O Gene Egoísta revolucionou a nossa compreensão da teoria da evolução ao argumentar que são os genes e não os organismos as unidades fundamentais da seleção natural. Por sinal, Dawkins também foi quem cunhou o termo meme, mas não no sentido corrente em que ele é empregado no cotidiano para se referir a piadas que se espalham rapidamente na internet. Dawkins propôs o termo meme para descrever unidades culturais de informação que se replicam e se propagam de uma mente para outra, de forma análoga à forma como os genes são replicados e transmitidos na biologia. Assim como genes são pequenas unidades de informação que são passados de geração a geração e podem sofrer mutações, os memes são unidades de cultura que são transmitidos e propagados pelo comportamento, por meio da linguagem, das ideias e outros meios, podendo ser alterados nesse processo. Dawkins utilizou o exemplo de gírias, melodias, modas culturais, coisas que pegam e que todo mundo começa a repetir, como exemplos da sua teoria memética. Mas foi em 2006 que Dawkins se tornou uma figura muito popular por conta do seu ativismo ateísta com a publicação desse livro, Deus, um Delírio, The God Delusion, uma obra abertamente voltada para a conversão das pessoas, ou melhor, desconversão das pessoas. Dawkins expõe nela como que as religiões organizadas podem causar e causam dano às pessoas, incluindo crianças. Aqui ele critica duramente as instituições religiosas e as tentativas de argumentar a favor de Deus, muito embora essa não seja a especialidade dele, a argumentação filosófica ou teológica. É famoso também o livro que se tornou a réplica desse grande livro de Dawkins, que se chamou, não à toa, O Delírio de Dawkins, por Alistair McGrath. Tem inclusive um vídeo no YouTube em que os dois debatem, e debatem muito respeitosa e intensamente, de pé. É muito interessante assistir a esse debate. Indignado, portanto, com as crenças religiosas da maioria das pessoas que acreditam, por exemplo, em eventos extremamente implausíveis do ponto de vista natural, como a ressurreição de Jesus Cristo, os supostos milagres, o suposto fato dele ter nascido de uma virgem, eventos que são extremamente implausíveis e que muito mais provavelmente foram forjados durante a escrita dos textos bíblicos. Isso é o tipo de coisa que mexe muito com Dawkins e que faz com que ele seja visto como uma figura muito provocativa e irritante nos debates, porque ele conduz as pessoas de fé com quem ele debate a encontrar logo a irracionalidade de seus dogmas e de suas crenças. Dawkins argumenta, portanto, que a religião é uma forma de delírio coletivo que prejudica o progresso científico e social.
You said in a speech famously that I think a case can be made that faith is one of the world's great evils, comparable to the smallpox virus, but harder to eradicate.
I do think that, yes. Because what I'm talking about there is faith, where faith means belief in something without evidence. Because if you believe something without evidence, then that justifies anything. You're no longer vulnerable to somebody coming back at you and saying, hang on a minute, let me argue the case. If you believe it without evidence, which is what faith is, then you don't argue the case. You say, no, I'm not arguing that case. This is my faith. It's mine. It's private. I don't dissent from it. I don't retreat from it. You're just going to have to accept it. Now that is evil. And I think that's probably what religions are. I think they are a sort of computer virus which spreads because they contain within their own code the instructions for spreading. Believe in me and pass it on to your children. I mean, that's a powerful piece of computer virus code. Believe in me and go out and spread the word as a missionary. Believe in me and you will have everlasting life. The thing that I really object to about religion is that it teaches us to be satisfied with not understanding. This evening I'm reflecting more that what may really be the enemy of truth and the enemy of science is willful obscurantism, whether it comes from religion or not.
Is there something in particular that really you can't stand about God?
About
God?
Well, I don't think God exists, so obviously that wouldn't apply. There's something I can't stand about Christianity, which is just what I've been saying about this really obnoxious doctrine of original sin, which I think is actually hideous and demeaning, and it's a vengeful doctrine. It's the idea that one can be absolved. That a sin by somebody else has to be paid for by a different person, which is a horrible idea. Everything about it is an obnoxious doctrine.
You talked about the evidence that your wife loves you. I think for most religious people, the evidence that there's a God is rather like that.
When you say that your wife loves you, and you're getting evidence from looks in the eye and catches in the voice was the phrase that I actually used. And the questioner said, that's the way religious people feel about God. Yes, they feel that about God, but there's no evidence that they're getting any cues at all. I mean, their God is an imaginary God inside themselves. They feel that they're getting little looks from the eyes of God and sounds from the voice of God, but why should we believe them since we can't see or hear any evidence to that effect? If God doesn't exist, then doing something good in his name it's great that something good gets done, but there's no evidence at all that believing in God makes you more likely to do good things. I can't see any noble, logical connection between being religious and doing good things.
Infelizmente, nos últimos dias, o renomado filósofo Dennett se tornou o segundo dos Cavaleiros a falecer. O primeiro foi Christopher Hitchens, o jornalista, o polemista, de quem falaremos a seguir. Dennett foi reconhecido por sua abordagem naturalista e materialista para a mente. Em Consciousness Explained, ele argumentou que a mente pode ser compreendida em termos de processos biológicos e computacionais, discordando das concepções dualistas que veem a mente como uma entidade separada do corpo, e propondo, portanto, uma visão integrada e fisicalista da consciência humana. Em Breaking the Spell, Dennett considera a religião um fenômeno cultural e natural, sujeito, portanto, às análises empíricas e científicas. Ele explora como as crenças religiosas surgem e se propagam na sociedade, sempre de um ponto de vista natural e científico. Dennett argumenta que entender a religião como um produto da evolução cultural pode nos ajudar a promover um diálogo mais construtivo entre crentes e não crentes. Autor também de Darwin's Dangerous Idea, Dennett foi um grande defensor do darwinismo. Dennett argumenta que a teoria da evolução por seleção natural de Charles Darwin é perigosa não porque seja falsa ou destrutiva, mas porque desafia muitas das crenças arraigadas sobre a natureza, a moralidade e a própria existência humana. Ela implica que não há um propósito intrínseco à vida, que não somos criados por uma entidade divina com um plano pré-determinado, e que a diversidade da vida na Terra é o resultado de processos naturais ao longo de milhões de anos. Dennett explora as implicações filosóficas, científicas e culturais da ideia perigosa de Darwin em seu livro, argumentando que ela tem o poder de transformar fundamentalmente nossa compreensão do mundo e de nós mesmos. Ele defende uma abordagem naturalista e materialista para entender a vida, a mente e a cultura, baseada na ciência e na razão.
I suspect that you and I would in fact be called by other people atheists. Was there a point at which you became one? Had you always been one? Or is there in fact a history of the development of disbelief on your part?
I was raised in one of those bland New England suburban Protestant faiths, the congregational faith, which has hardly any creed at all, but lots of good hymns and ceremonies. And I went to Sunday school and learned the books of the Bible in order: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, etc. So I got a good deal of biblical lore, but not a stern religious upbringing by any stretch of the imagination. And I was always interested in it. Intellectually, philosophically, I was a little budding philosopher. I suppose I was a teenager before I began to realize that my interest in this was I feel like academic. I didn't believe it at all. And I didn't seriously think about whether I'd ever believed it, or whether it had been just part of a tradition that it was, go along with it because it's a bit offensive to challenge something like this. I mean, if you see a terribly obese person, you don't walk up and say, "My God, you're obese." We don't do things like that. It's just impolite. And if people around you are being devout, it's worse than rude to challenge them. And so I don't think I ever really I never had a conversion experience. I just gradually realized that I didn't believe any of this. I don't even believe in belief in God. That is, they believe that belief in God is a really good thing. It is something to strive for, something to be maybe proud of if you succeed. And the behavior of somebody who believes in belief in God is just the behavior we observe. You go to church, you sing hymns, you give money to the church, and so forth. If you actually believed in God, you do all sorts of lunatic things, and we don't see very many people doing those things. They don't put their lives on the line for God, typically. And I thought it was a little bit like belief in Santa Claus. It's something that we do. We talk about it. We sort of pretend to believe in God, and maybe the immature ones actually believe in God. And then some people grow out of it. There are times when I think it would be much better if we were a lot franker and ruder about religious belief. If we look around the world today, I would say that by far more danger, more harm comes from religious belief on every side than help. Yes, religions at their best provide succor and meaning and comfort to people who are really hard pressed. And I think that's what we don't want to deny to people.
Yes, I mean, I don't. But nevertheless, I'm often rebuked for being bloody rude about people's religious beliefs.
I think we have to think seriously about what the, if you like, the environmental impact of putting a view out there is. It's possible that some real mischief, some real harm might come from presenting a position which is in itself perfectly true. But let's look at the boundaries of this. If somebody's a member of a cult, as we say, we have no trouble being rude with them, with laughing at the Raelians or those people that got interested in the comet, various doomsday prophesiers when the prophecies don't come true. We laugh at those people, and the world laughs with us at them. So we have a line where we consider some religious belief to be just too kooky to take seriously, and we are rude with impunity in talking about those.
But is it because they're minority opinions?
I think so. I think that's all it is. But I think this is just political. If Christianity were a small sect in the world, I think it wouldn't receive the respect. But look at all those churches that the Christians have built. Look at all the great arts. Look at all the great music. It's hard to be rude to a religion which has created so much great culture. I've had this friendly disagreement with Richard Dawkins over just this issue. And I say, Richard, I, of course, completely agree with you, but I don't think you want to hurt people's feelings. Why do you want to hurt people's? Why do you want? And for a long time, I thought he didn't have a good reply to that. And more recently, I've been thinking, man, maybe I should hurt a few more people's feelings. Maybe we should turn the tide a bit on this. Maybe we should get out in front of this. And yes, we'll take some awful lumps because we'll be the rude, evil ones. But let's see if we can just move the barrier a little bit. But maybe we should get out there with Richard and be more aggressive, just to open up the space behind us.
Christopher Hitchens, nascido em 1949 em Portsmouth, Inglaterra, iniciou sua carreira como jornalista e escritor. Sua perspicácia, inteligência e amor pela liberdade de expressão o levaram a se destacar em debates e discussões sobre uma variedade de temas controversos. Hitchens é mais conhecido por suas obras provocativas, como Deus não é grande, como a religião envenena tudo, onde ele argumenta vigorosamente contra a religião organizada e sua influência negativa na sociedade. Sua abordagem ao debater questões religiosas era sempre direta e incisiva. Ele defendia, claro, que a religião era uma fonte de divisão, de intolerância e de dogmatismo, e defendia, no seu lugar, o pensamento racional e científico como uma alternativa superior. Um dos traços mais distintivos de Hitchens foi a sua enorme erudição, revelando como que pessoas e indivíduos que não são religiosos podem ter enorme sensibilidade literária e artística. Apesar de sua morte em 2011 por causa de um câncer que vinha enfrentando, o legado de Hitchens continua a ressoar. Sua coragem, eloquência e compromisso com a liberdade de expressão inspiram milhões ao redor do mundo a questionar crenças arraigadas e a firmar um compromisso com a razão.
My question is to Christopher is how you can justify wanting to take something away from people from 95 that gives meaning to 95% of the American people and replace it with something that gives meaning to just 5% of the American people?
Well, what an incredibly stupid question. First, I've said repeatedly that this stuff cannot be taken away from people. It is their favorite toy, and it will remain so. As Freud said in The Future of an Illusion, it will remain that way as long as we're afraid of death and have no problem, which is, I think, likely to be quite a long time. Second, I hope I've made it clear that I'm perfectly happy for people to have these toys and to play with them at home and hug them to themselves and so on and share them with other people who come around and play with the toys. So that's absolutely fine. They are not to make me play with these toys. Okay? I will not play with the toys. Don't bring the toys to my house. Don't say my children must play with these toys. Don't say my toys might be a condom. Here we go again. Are not allowed by their toys. I'm not going to have any of that. Enough with clerical and religious bullying and intimidation. Is that finally clear? Have I got that across? Thank you.
The original collision between our reasoning faculties and any form of organized faith, this is my book, though it must have occurred before in the minds of many, is probably exemplified in the trial of Socrates in 399 BC. It does not matter at all to me that we have no absolute certainty that Socrates even existed. The records of his life and his words are second-hand, almost but not quite as much as are the books of the Jewish and Christian Bible and the hadiths of Islam. Philosophy, however, has no need of such demonstrations because it does not deal in revealed wisdom. Now, as it happens, we do have some very good descriptions of the life of Socrates that make his existence to me plausible, but it doesn't matter to me at all whether he was real or not. What matters is that someone advanced his method of reasoning, his testing of evidence against experience, his commitment to a certain kind of dialectical honesty, and that if it hadn't been him, it would have been someone else. So that's what's precious to me. And that he never said, you've got to believe in everything I say, or go to hell, or heaven. Because, and here's why you've got to agree with me, because my mother never went to bed with anybody. And that proves the truth of what I say. Or by the way, I must have looked very dead when they took me down from the cross, but I didn't die. And that proves my point. I'm willing to grant it all. I'm willing to grant the Immaculate Conception first, then the virgin birth, then the resurrection, and the Annunciation and the Assumption. I'm willing to grant all of it. It doesn't prove the truth of the proposition that you should take no thought for the morrow. The central doctrine of Jesus of Nazareth, take no thought for the morrow. No investment, no thrift, no care for your children, that you should abandon your family, not worry about construction, about investment, about anything. Just follow me. A ridiculous and immoral proposition that, as C.S. Lewis so cleverly, and I must say for him, very honestly puts it, means that the man must either have been a maniac, a sick man, an evil man, or he must have believed that the world was coming immediately to an end, and that he was commanded to announce this fact to the deluded Bronze Age inhabitants of Palestine. Because if he didn't believe that, and if he didn't believe he was divinely mandated, then his words would not have been inaccurate or false, they would have been wicked. That's what you have to be talking about. Now, there is, on the historicity point, there are only two reasons, I think, to suppose that there may have been the figure of some kind of deluded rabbi present at that time. The first is the fakery of the story. The fakery itself proves something. The prophecy says this man must be born in the house of David, of David's line in David's town. It means he must be born in Bethlehem. Jesus of Nazareth is well known to have been born in Nazareth. In order to get him to Bethlehem, a huge fabrication has to be undertaken. A census is proposed by Caesar Augustus. No such census ever took place. The people of the region were not required to go back to their hometown to be registered. That's never happened. Quirinius was not governor of Syria in that year, as the Gospels say. None of the story of the Nativity is true in any detail, and not one of the Gospels agrees with each other on this fabrication. But the fabrication itself suggests something. If they were simply going to make up the whole thing, and there'd never been any such person, then why not just have him born in Bethlehem right there and leave out the Nazarene business? So the very falsity of it, the very fanatical attempt to make it come right, suggests that, yes, there may have been a charismatic, deluded individual wandering around at that time. But which is most impressive to you? The fantastic fabrications, the unbelievably inane and inarticulate preachments, or the inconsistencies in the story? You could mention another thing about the resurrection. Most of the witnesses to this are women, illiterate, stupid, deluded, hysterical females, of the kind who in a Jewish court at that time would have had about as much chance of being listened to as they would in an Islamic court today. What religion that wants its fabrication to be believed is going to say, you've got to believe it, because we have some illiterate, hysterical girls who said they saw this? No, it's impressive to me. It's impressive to me that the evidence is so thin, and is so hysterical, and is so feeble, and is so obviously, strenuously cobbled together, because it suggests that something was going on. There was some character. And I don't want to, therefore, to profane those who think that no, that there must have been something, and say, no, there was nothing. This is not a whole cloth fabrication, but it is a very human and very intelligible and very pitiable, I think, practice of fraud.
O mais jovem dos Cavaleiros nasceu em 1967 nos Estados Unidos e formou-se pela Universidade de Stanford em Filosofia e depois pela Universidade da Califórnia em Neurociência. Sam Harris busca adotar uma abordagem científica à ética e à moralidade. Em livros como O Fim da Fé e a Paisagem Moral, além, é claro, de criticar as religiões organizadas, Harris advoca por uma compreensão da ética como um campo próprio, um campo que pode ser embasado cientificamente a partir de uma compreensão maior do cérebro, que nós já estamos tendo agora. Ele herda do utilitarismo o conceito de bem-estar, well-being, como uma espécie de sumo bem visado nessa nova empreitada de constituir uma ética científica. O sumo bem seria o well-being, o bem-estar do maior número de pessoas. E aí ele cria uma paisagem moral, onde o pico é o maior bem-estar possível, aquelas partes mais baixas do gráfico da paisagem são as sociedades com a moral mais prejudicada e com a felicidade das pessoas mais prejudicada e menos presente. É, portanto, um consequencialismo muito particular e calcado na ciência, que talvez tenha sido injustamente vítima de muito mais críticas do que deveria. Além de sua pesquisa em neurociência e ética, Harris também é um praticante de meditação e um defensor da espiritualidade secular. Ele argumenta que a meditação pode ser uma ferramenta poderosa para promover o bem-estar emocional e o autoconhecimento, o que é o tema central de Despertar, um de seus livros recentes e que está disponível para compra pelo link na descrição. Como os outros 3 cavaleiros, Harris rejeita a religião organizada e busca contribuir para um futuro secularizado e, sobretudo, livre do fundamentalismo islâmico, o que ele nem considera um fundamentalismo, pois, no seu entendimento, essa palavra é um eufemismo, uma vez que o próprio Corão contém fundamentos que são absolutamente deploráveis do ponto de vista ético e que são simplesmente seguidos à risca por grupos chamados de fundamentalistas. Então o problema para ele são os próprios fundamentos do Islã.
Okay, the whole point of Christianity, or so it is imagined, is to safeguard the eternal well-being of human souls. Now, happily, there's absolutely no evidence that the Christian hell exists. And I think we should look at the consequences of believing in this framework, this theistic framework, in this world, and what these moral underpinnings actually would be. All right. 9 million children die every year before they reach the age of 5. Okay, picture an Asian tsunami of the sort we saw in 2004 that killed 250,000 people. One of those every 10 days, killing children only under 5. Okay, it's 24,000 children a day, 1,000 an hour, 17 or so a minute. That means before I can get to the end of this sentence, some few children, very likely, will have died in terror and agony. Think of the parents of these children. Think of the fact that most of these men and women believe in God and are praying at this moment for their children to be spared. And their prayers will not be answered. Okay, but according to Dr. Craig, this is all part of God's plan. Any God who would allow children by the millions to suffer and die in this way, and their parents to grieve in this way, either can do nothing to help them or doesn't care to. He is therefore either impotent or evil. And worse than that, on Dr. Craig's view, most of these people, many of these people certainly, will be going to hell because they're praying to the wrong God. Just think about that. Okay, through no fault of their own, they were born into the wrong culture where they got the wrong theology and they miss the revelation. Okay, there are 1.2 billion people in India at this moment. Most of them are Hindus, most of them therefore polytheists. Okay, in Dr. Craig's universe, no matter how good these people are, they are doomed. If you are praying to the monkey god Hanuman, you are doomed. You will be tortured in hell for eternity. Now, is there the slightest evidence for this? No. It just says so in Mark 9 and Matthew 13 and Revelation 14. Okay, perhaps you'll remember from the Lord of the Rings, it says when the elves die, they go to Valinor, but they can be reborn in Middle-earth. I say that just as a point of comparison. Okay, so God created the cultural isolation of the Hindus. Okay, He engineered the circumstance of their deaths in ignorance of revelation. And then He created the penalty for this ignorance, which is an eternity of conscious torment in fire. Okay, on the other hand, on Dr. Craig's account, your run-of-the-mill serial killer in America, okay, who spent his life raping and torturing children, need only come to God, come to Jesus on death row. And after a final meal of fried chicken, he's going to spend an eternity in heaven after death. Okay, one thing should be crystal clear to you. This vision of life has absolutely nothing to do with moral accountability. Okay, and please notice the double standard that people like Dr. Craig use to exonerate God from all this evil. Okay, we're told that God is loving and kind and just and intrinsically good. But when someone like myself points out the rather obvious and compelling evidence that God is cruel and unjust because He visits suffering on innocent people of a scope and scale that would embarrass the most ambitious psychopath, okay, we're told that God is mysterious. Okay, who can understand God's will? Okay, and yet this is precisely, this merely human understanding of God's will is precisely what believers use to establish His goodness in the first place. You know, something good happens to a Christian. He feels some bliss while praying, say, or he sees some positive change in his life, and we're told that God is good. Okay, but when children by the tens of thousands are torn from their parents' arms and drowned, we're told that God is mysterious.
The 11th century sage Al-Ghazali, perhaps the most influential Muslim since Muhammad, described a woman's duties this way. She should stay at home and get on with her spinning. She should not go out often. She must not be well informed, nor must she be communicative with her neighbors, and only visit them when absolutely necessary. She should take care of her husband and respect him in his presence and in his absence and seek to satisfy him in everything. She must not leave the house without his permission, and if given his permission, she must leave surreptitiously. Her sole worry should be her virtue, her home as well as her prayers and her fast. If a friend of her husband calls when the latter is absent, she must not open the door nor reply to him in order to safeguard her and her husband's honor. She should accept what her husband gives her as sufficient sexual needs at any moment. She should be clean and ready to satisfy her husband's sexual needs at any moment. The Old Testament values the life of a woman at 1/2 to 2/3 that of a man. The Quran says that the testimony of 2 women is required to offset the testimony of 1 man. And every woman is deserving of 1/2 her brother's share of inheritance. The net effect of religion, especially in the Abrahamic tradition, has been to demonize female sexuality and portray women as morally and intellectually inferior to men. So I think this is a fact that really cannot be disputed. If we ever achieve a global civilization that truly values and honors the rights and capabilities of women, it will not be because we paid more attention to our holy books.
It's not understandable because we don't know where the answer comes from.
Well, we don't know where anything comes from.
That's true.
Yeah, okay, so yeah, but that doesn't open the door. I mean, one thing we can know with absolute certainty is that whoever wrote the Bible didn't know either. And there's many other things he or she didn't know, like everything else we know scientifically, right?
It's not so obvious what people know and what they don't know.
No one even knew the brain was involved in any of this.
God is how we imaginatively and collectively represent the existence and action of consciousness across time, as the most real aspects of existence manifest themselves across the longest of time frames, but are not necessarily apprehensible as objects in the here and now.
I'm wondering what percentage of religious people who would say, oh yeah, I believe in God and it's the most important thing in my life, what percentage of those religious people do you think have in mind a God of the sort you just described? Bible thumpers in my country who think that Jesus is very likely coming back in their lifetime because he never died, and he's going to judge the living and the dead, and there will be a resurrection and hellfire and all the rest. If that's not the game you're playing at all, own it.
Embora esses 4 intelectuais tenham se tornado símbolos e porta-vozes do ateísmo, e o seu trabalho seja extremamente importante, é também importante lembrar que eles não são os únicos. Assim como os 4 cavaleiros, existem diversos outros filósofos e pensadores e cientistas ateus que atuam com extrema competência no mundo acadêmico e que são menos conhecidos do público apenas, como Graham Hoppe, Peter Boghossian, Susan Blackmore, entre muitos outros, cujo trabalho também merece ser conhecido e divulgado. Se as ideias desses pensadores do vídeo ressoaram contigo e você está buscando uma introdução prática e desmistificadora do ateísmo, você pode ler o meu ensaio Ser Ateu, disponível em formato digital na Amazon, que já conta com 60 avaliações e que está ajudando muita gente a conhecer melhor o ateísmo e desmistificá-lo. Os links para todos os livros mencionados neste vídeo estão aqui na descrição. Gostaria de agradecer aos membros do canal, como sempre, por seu apoio fundamental. Considere se tornar um membro você também para ter acesso a conteúdos exclusivos e participar do meu grupo de membros. Até o próximo vídeo.